All right, ladies and gentlemen, the Yankees might not be back, but we are back. Episode 14 of the Jimmy Randazzo Show. We have a very, very special guest, senior fantasy analyst and editor at Rotoballer, Fantasy Pro's most accurate baseball analyst in 2018. He is an NFL fantasy football extraordinaire, the great Nick Mariano. Nick, how you doing, brother?
I'm great. I'm wonderful. Football season approaches. We've already got random injuries hitting the timeline that we need to account for. Every day is going to bring something new now, so we just have to be ready.
Yeah, and I know you're still probably in full baseball mode. I mean, fantasy baseball stuff's coming up. We're just going to take our Yankee brains, our fantasy baseball brains. We're going to throw it to the side today. Because today we are getting all the fans ready for fantasy football. It's time. It's officially time. And I actually probably would be remiss to start it off this way. There's one guy that is in the top 10 rankings every single year, and he doesn't have a home right now. His name is Dalvin Cook. And, obviously, I was even thinking about it. The rankings could greatly be affected about like where he's going. So where do you think he's going if you had to take a stab at it, and how drastically will it affect the board?
I don't love playing the here's one team game. I try to spread the risk, and I will say in early drafts that I've done on Underdog, I would say the ADP does a good job at reflecting the risk for respective teams that have rumor ties to them. And even little stuff like Leonard Fournette worked out for the Patriots. All of a sudden, he went from a round 18 flyer to round 14. And that was just a blip on the radar. Cook seems to be holding steady around 7th round, but I've seen him go as early as the 5th for people who believe. I don't think he's going to go to a team like the Patriots. I know a lot of people wanted him to go to the Dolphins. There are talks now about the Giants, depending on Barkley's leverage. If I had to pick one, I could see the Giants being all right, we're not going to play this game. They signed James Robinson. That's not going to move the needle. They have this playoff caliber team. Say what you want about as far as they'll make it in the playoffs once they're there, but they're a playoff caliber team. They shouldn't mess around.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, there's something happened with the Bills. One of the running backs just got injured in a jet ski incident. And my huge belief, and I'm a huge Giants fan, I love Saquon Barkley. I just, the way that the running back position is, the market's low on them, to say it, as easy as possible. So I wouldn't personally mind taking a look at Dalvin, signing Dalvin to something, maybe $7-8 million a year, trade Barkley for possibly a first-round pick and get it over with like that, because I do think that the Giants, in order for them to go forwards, they might have to go backwards a tiny bit. But all right, that's good. I mean, listen, as far as guesses go, if you want to put Dalvin Cook on the Giants side, yeah, that's great. Okay. First overall, let's just assume for the entire time we're together that we're talking about half PPR. I feel like it's the easiest way to do it. First overall pick, if you had to choose in half PPR format, you got the first overall pick, who you taking?
It's still Jefferson. I don't care if it's half. He's in the prime of his career, showing good durability. Kirk Cousins loves him. Jordan Addison has that weird, that large speeding ticket hanging over him. I'm not entirely sure about the suspension thing, but the Henry Ruggs situation does put more pressure on Goodell to levy some sort of maybe 1-2 game suspension, which obviously rookies need all the time they can to start establishing chemistry. No one's really that scared of KJ Osborne siphoning things. Last year, Jefferson was that guy. He'd be double teamed all the time. Didn't matter. He'd have one hand pinned behind him by a DB. Doesn't matter. He'll go up and get it. he's the man. And then obviously the rushing game, we talk about Dalvin Cook, and now it's Alexander Mattison. How much do people trust him to be the lead back? This offense goes through Jefferson. I want Jefferson. I see the arguments for CMC and Chase, but I want Jefferson.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, if I have the first overall pick, I'm just taking Christian McCaffrey based on the depth of the wide receiver position, because, and then personally, I mean, I really don't think there's a wrong answer there, and I'm actually happy that you chose Jefferson for that answer. Just, there were so many times last year when I took Christian McCaffrey anytime touchdown and him like over 50 reception yards, and I mean, you're really just asking they're both just 1A, 1B type players. So I don't really think there's a wrong answer there. And, when you look, I mean, I think that we could both agree that Chase is probably the third guy off the board. Would you tend to agree on that?
I see him go 2 more often than 3 personally, because also the things that are drafted this early are typically more tournament style games versus like you and me joining a 12-team league together in a vacuum.
Right.
And wide receiver upside has been pushed way up in the past couple of years, where maybe 15 of the first 24 picks across the first 2 rounds or even more are wide receivers, and running backs start to get depressed. And it becomes this game of like, okay, would you rather have CMC and T. Higgins versus Justin Jefferson and say like Tony Pollard? Like, what makes you feel more comfortable going out of that? And again, there doesn't have to be a wrong answer, but you have to have a plan.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, I'd probably rather have Justin Jefferson and Tony Pollard. I don't think that Tony Pollard's making it out of the first round. Personally, I'm pretty high on Tony Pollard. I think Fantasy Pros, which you're pretty accustomed to, they have him half PPR. They have him ranked 12th overall. So I don't know if he's going to go that late, but I see what you're saying. And really, if we look at the running back position as a whole, other than Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler, there's question marks at every single guy. I mean, really, people are really high on Nick Chubb this year. Personally, I get it. Deshaun Watson's going to have a full training camp, and he's an absolute monster. And Kareem Hunt he's still a free agent, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, Chubb's another guy, but the running back position, that's the reason why I do want to take a Christian McCaffrey, just because there is really a lot of question marks at the running back position. Bijan Robinson, I mean, he was an absolute monster. He's probably the best running back talent-wise since Saquon Barkley came out, 4 years ago. What are your thoughts on him, just their offense in general, and how early would you be excited to take him?
I would prefer to get him in the second round, which is not happening. It's hard for me to get excited about the Falcons in general. Last year was tough as far as, they wanted Marcus Mariota to work, but that just didn't work. And it created the snowball effect, I think, where they wound up just being this run heavy, run often offense. And we saw nice things like Tyler Algier showed up. Cordarrelle Patterson's still there. He's free in drafts. Like, he's a nice thing to tuck away. Obviously, everyone had their hearts broken by Kyle Pitts, but then you throw in Bijan and you get this, they're calling him offensive weapon on an offense. Last year, they ranked second. They had the second lowest pass rate over expectation, as far as about minus 14% below what you'd expect. They had a 51% rush rate in general. Like, is that going to hold? Did they let Desmond Ridder kind of rip it a little bit? How much of this is flat work for Bijan to get him comfortable with, not pressing downfield as much? Algier's not going anywhere. You start looking at things like the Vegas over-unders for their games, I bet they're going to start pretty low. So you need Bijan to have a lot of that touchdown equity You know, is he going to be the Jamal Williams basically, where he's just always that hammer, or is Algier going to sneak in? And do you really want that tied to Desmond Ritter's development in the first round? You're asking a lot of what ifs. Full PPR, I can see it, especially if you think they'll be from behind often. Half PPR, it starts to get a little dicey.
Yeah, I mean, that's great insight. And yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna agree with you. You know what it kind of reminds me of? It reminds me of Najee Harris in his early, like, or even 2 years ago with the Steelers, where they before they had Pickett and they didn't really know what they were doing, and it was kind of like, all right, this guy's really talented, but he can't run through 11 guys himself. So no, I tend to agree with you there. He's just, as far as Fantasy Pros has him in ranks of tiers, he's fifth overall. And I'm not, I'm in total agreement with you. There's probably 14 or 15 guys I'm taking over him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, okay.
If
All
you
right.
if you have a tiebreaker, go with the good offense, right?
Right.
Push down the bad ones.
Yeah. Okay. So now I have a question. I was in a huge debate with my brother 2 days ago on the person that everyone loved 2 years ago, Cooper Kupp. Now, Cooper Kupp, I mean, he's kind of I think it's going to be more based on Matthew Stafford's health and not Cooper Kupp. But there are questions. Cooper Kupp has been ranked as high as 3 and as low as wide receiver 10 in some rankings. What do you think about Cooper Kupp? How high are you on him this year? And like when it gets to like a question of like a Cooper Kupp or a Jalen Waddle, like where are you going? And what are your just thoughts on him?
Well, you bring that up, and then it's like, okay, do I trust Stafford to stay healthy, or do I trust Tua to stay healthy? And now it feels pretty even, so I'll just take Kupp in that game. But
Right.
I worry about putting. I mean, that's why we were talking about top 3, right? Like the highest I'm comfortable with Kupp is at 4, and even then, Eckler and Kelsey start to creep into the conversation. Tightrope procedures, like he's not young, but he's not old. He's not dust.
Right.
But yeah, if you close your eyes and you try to think about developing Stetson Bennett or something, trying to throw him passes, like he'd probably be great. Again, PPR half, it starts to be a little bit more about the touchdowns, but he's thrived for so long, and it didn't matter last year that their wide receiver 2 was the ghost of Allen Robinson, and then they were trying to make Van Jefferson a thing. And then you've got Ben Skoranek being a waiver wire guy just because he catches 3 or 4 balls, or Tutu Atwell. Like it didn't really matter who else was around him. I'm comfortable with Kupp at 4. Wide receiver 10. So briefly, I will say be careful with the Fantasy Pro stuff, because a lot of people will take deviating stances to try to stand out because it is good for them. If Kupp does get injured, their accuracy score gets boosted. At the end of the day, the Fantasy Pros thing is still a game for us as rankers, and it's a competition. So people, you have to be aware of the framework that people are presenting their ranks in. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid to interject your own context and gut feeling to it.
For sure, for sure. So, okay, let's make it a little bit easier. So this is what Fantasy Pros, and I take the consensus. I'm not going to look at one guy and see what he's taking, unless it's Nick Mariano, which obviously we're going to be looking at his thoughts more than anyone else's. So I'm just going to, obviously Jefferson's 1 and Chase is 2. Like, I don't think, or whatever, you can reverse them if you want, but those are the 2 top guys. They're off. I mean, that just really makes the most sense. But, I could personally see they have Cooper Kupp 3, they have Tyreek Hill 4, they have Stephon Diggs 5, CeeDee Lamb 6, AJ Brown 7, Devontae Adams 8. And personally, like, if you want to argue Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, or even AJ Brown over Cooper Kupp, like, who am I to tell you that that's not the right answer? I feel like there are just a lot of good guys there. So yeah, I mean, I personally might be a little bit, even looking at it a little bit lower on Cooper Kupp than you, I guess. But like, I don't know, it's kind of difficult because there are so many amazing guys this year, and and a Devontae Adams, who's usually a top 8 overall pick, he has Garoppolo now, and it's kind of like, oh, like, do I want to take this shot with him? So it'll be a little iffy with the wide receiver range. Getting a little bit further down, we have like a little bracket kind of with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, and the aforementioned T. Higgins before. Who's somebody that stands out there when I mention those 4 names? And somebody, or is there somebody that you're just like, I need this guy?
The first name you said, I thought you might creep in Amon-Ra St. Brown with the other names that you might consider ahead of Kupp. I was looking around, and I don't expect Dan Campbell to change too much philosophically. Bite the kneecaps off, loves to pound the ball. They went out and got David Montgomery. They drafted Gibbs really high, but Jamal Williams had 41 carries inside the 10 last year, and the next highest guy was Joe Mixon with 29, which is just a wild gap. So how much of that is going to go to Gibbs and Montgomery? Like, I think they'll keep that. But you have to sit back and be like, okay, Jameson Williams suspended. Like, what if Amon-Ra gets a significant portion of that touchdown equity, and all of a sudden, he is capable of being the number 1 overall receiver in the NFL. If those touchdowns start to fly through the air a bit more, I like Sam Laporta. I think he'll develop well as a tight end too, but there isn't too much competition around him. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on the fact that there are touchdowns to be gained in that offense. And also they just lost, well, potentially CJ Gardner-Johnson got carted off, one of those big defensive ads for them. And, a big thing was that they added defense help so that they'd stop getting in these shootouts. But, leaks happen, and they're still capable of putting up 35, 40 points any game.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's really fair. He is the number 1 on that team. So are you taking Amon-Ra St. Brown before Devontae Adams, AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb, guys like that? Or is that still to be?
I have him. I mean, I'm a big proponent of tiers personally. Like, it gets really tough. You look at a linear list and it becomes so ingrained that it's like, this person is above this person.
Right.
And I try to keep it pretty fluid within that, but I'm comfortable. I'm usually taking Amon-Ra over Devontae Adams. I feel a little better that Garoppolo he passed the physical, but I feel better about Goff. But Brown, I still have Brown 6, Lamb 7, St. Brown 8, and then Adams 9.
All right, cool. And is Garrett Wilson in that tier for you, or is he a tier below?
He's slightly below. I have him at 10. I have him above Waddle and Higgins still. But
okay.
Maybe it's just that weird thing. You grow up in New York, you see the Jets thing there, and you have that little devil on your shoulder, be like, it's the Jets. Like, how much can you trust this? I have high hopes for them. I think Garrett Wilson should explode, but they could, there are a lot of question marks, and how much does Aaron Rodgers have in the tank? And I think he's got one good campaign left in him for sure, but the defense can still carry the team. I'm not sure how explosive the offense is going to be through the air, at least at first.
Yeah.
He's carrying over a lot of chemistry with guys like Lazard coming over, but I have high hopes. Top 10 is still top 10, right? But we have these other guys with fewer question marks ahead. Okay, Devontae Adams has question marks. Cooper Kupp has question marks, but like, we've seen them be the wide receiver one before. We haven't seen
Right.
that out of Wilson yet. So it's
Yeah,
all
that's
about the
fair.
median range.
Yeah, and I think that it really is the question. And when it starts to be like Garrett Wilson or, one of the most explosive offenses is number two, that's really when the question starts to really come. And I agree with you. Like, if we're drafting today and Devontae Adams or Garrett Wilson, I mean, how do you not pick Devontae Adams in that sense? So I tend to agree with you. And then, there's the tier three kind of guys, Olave, Devonta Smith, Metcalf, Cooper, Keenan Allen, Debo Samuel, kind of guys thrown all in the mix. Is there one guy you like the most within that range?
I would still want Smith above the rest. Smith and Olave, I would say, are pretty clearly like the 1A out of that tier for me. Devonta just has it in him. Like, AJ Brown is amazing. Great guy, deserves to be a fringe top 5 guy. I won't argue with that. But there's no reason. It's the same kind of philosophical thing with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, right? Like in general, the wide receiver one with that sexy label attached to him tends to go high. And then the wide receiver two in the room, he's still getting a lot of scheme plays for him. There's still so much offensive upside with Philadelphia. A lot of people are anticipating a little regression when it comes to the rushing touchdown tally versus the passing touchdown tally. And basically, if AJ Brown can be your wide receiver 6 and you can get Devonta wide receiver 13, 14 around that maybe round 2, round 3 turn, again, that's a good argument as far as, that can be your CMC pairing. You want CMC
Yeah.
and Devonta.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, that's not as tier three is not really as sexy. It's kind of like, oh, I didn't draft a wide receiver yet. I need to go, you could draft a Kelsey and a running back, and you might need to get one of those guys like a Debo Samuel as your number one, just, in the way you draft. All right. The last wide receiver question I have for you is probably the biggest question mark that we have. And, the variance is probably crazy on this guy, Calvin Ridley. He's with the Jaguars now. Obviously, he had that the scandal with he was betting on football. How dare him? When the entire NFL is promoting DraftKings and FanDuel and underdog fantasy and this and that and the other thing. Thoughts on Calvin Ridley and him being in this pretty bona fide offense?
I think it's going to be exciting. I think the most interesting facet is probably going to be the effect on Christian Kirk. Kirk was one of those guys, like I think he was near the top 10 in terms of red zone targets, but he doesn't really have the frame for it. Evan Ingram started to come on. He's like, obviously Giants fans will know that he had all the athletic talent, the size for it, just not the consistency. But Ridley gives them more size, more athleticism around the red zone in particular. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence is starting to find his footing in the NFL. I'm happily taking Ridley, anywhere as my if I did take like Kelsey and then a running back or an elite quarterback or something, like Ridley is probably the last guy that I'm comfortable with as my wide receiver one. And obviously getting pieces of Jacksonville's offense in general. We talk about the whole tie break goes to the good offense. I mean, those guys are getting smashed everywhere. ETN's the other polar. I don't know who's more polarizing actually between Ridley and ETN, but I have many shares of them both happily in my pocket.
Good. Yeah, no, that's why that was another thing when I was looking at the wide receiver list. I was like looking, I'm like, oh my God, Calvin Ridley, like I mean, again, he could be a top 5 wide receiver, or let's just say maybe a top 10 wide receiver, or he could be receiver 40. All right. Well, that's enough questions, Adam. One last question on the wide receivers. Christian Watson, obviously, he's going to take a regression, especially being drafted without Aaron Rodgers on his team. Are you comfortable with him as a wide receiver 2, as your wide receiver 2, or is he more of a top end wide receiver 3 for, a team that's in a 12-team league?
I am not usually taking him, but I would say that's more an indictment of where I think it's just a victim of ADP. I think a lot of people are really gassed up after last year's rookie season, and too many people, project linear growth off of that instead of being like, okay, like Chase Claypool also had this amazing rookie season, got a lot of touchdown equity. The Packers are probably going to have some growing pains. Again, they're another one of those teams where last year we didn't see it as much. AJ Dillon's stumbled, but Dillon and Aaron Jones are probably going to be the ones dragging that offense down the field. The defense holds up. I don't know how much they're going to ask Jordan Love to do, and obviously, Watson's going to get his, but Dubs, is he developing enough as the number 2? Can Watson really be that outshining number 1? The one guy I take the most is actually Reed, probably as the slot man. That's probably, he's free. He's nowhere. He's like a wide receiver, probably 80, I think, around ADP stuff. And it's those, slot guy, safety blanket. He can work inside or out. That's the guy I'm most excited about for the offense, certainly at cost.
So that basically is, if you're out there, you don't really know what you're talking about when it comes to fantasy football, because we're helping, the smartest people to the people that are, their second time doing it. Don't really take any Packers this year. Just try to stray away from Packers if you have to. And as far as Packers go, let's talk about the running back. Where are you comfortable? If you're doing a draft, what round are you taking? What's the running back?
Aaron Jones.
Aaron Jones, excuse me, Aaron Jones. I almost said Aaron Judge. Aaron Jones. Where are you taking him?
Aaron Jones, for me, he's right around that like RB 18 range. He's usually going, I want to say late 5th, somewhere around there. Maybe slips into the 6th, and I'm comfortable with that. Certainly, if there's any PPR element, he's more than proven his receiving chops in the league versus Dillon being more of the hammer. I'm more comfortable taking him versus like Dameon Pierce. I'm more comfortable with him probably than Madison, unless I'm, really aiming for pure upside, and I'm okay taking the low floor. I've debated a few times, do I take Aaron Jones this round, or do I wait around and try to wait on like Isaiah Pacheco? And I usually wind up signing with Pacheco in that range, but he's also starting to get steamed up again as the videos come out from training camp. But yeah, if there's a PPR element, I'm happy taking Jones as my hopefully RB2 or RB1 if I went really wide receiver heavy.
Got it. Yeah. And that is one you just mentioned him, Alexander Madison. Is it because Dalvin Cook possibly could come back? Like, I just don't understand why he's so low. Again, he's just tier wise, he's at the bottom of tier 4 on Fantasy Pros. Personally, like if Dalvin Cook's not back in that offense, which again, we have to wait. Like, we're not going to be drafting for another 3 weeks, and hopefully Dalvin Cook will have a home, but why is he so low? Like, we saw what he can do when Dalvin Cook, when he's been the premier back in that offense. He's more of a top 14 guy than a 22nd overall guy. But I mean, again, is it the high ceiling, low floor kind of thing for him? Because, they have a rank behind Dameon Pierce, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, got Miles Sanders. Kenneth Walker, I understand, but like those other 5 names, I'm taking Alexander Madison every single time. So yeah, I really don't understand that whole thing. It probably could be because maybe Cook's coming back. I don't know.
There's definitely some of that. There's also just this general sense like, hey, maybe they bring in like an Ezekiel Elliott type and someone who may not take a lot of volume, but becomes a big threat. Those veteran plotters become the threat in the red zone, and then you start to lose the touchdown capital. We've seen Madison splash in small windows, but as far as trust goes over a 17-game season, there's also that as far as general durability, how much do they really trust him? I don't get the sense that a lot of people seem to be tepid, and Minnesota's not coming out like this is our guy. Like, he's been around for so long. They've been comfortable putting him in as the RB1 when Cook's been out, but he started really hot. He would average like 4.5 yards a carry in his first year, second year, and that's slipped under 4 yards per carry year 3, year 4. It's not the direction that your momentum wants to take you as far as general perception goes. I'm not reading too much into smaller samples like that, but
Okay.
in general, it's just all those little things that start to creep up on you, and then takes a little hit there, and falls one spot, two spot.
Sure. Yeah. I'm just like looking at those names and I'm like, am I going to take a guy in Houston's offense over Alexander Madison? It doesn't really make that much sense to me. And like you said, Ty goes to the better offense, and I really do like that as a setting. As we continue to talk about fantasy football for the next couple months. Another guy that really stood out, and I will go through the top 10 ranks, but this is the guy that was at 10. Ramondre Stevenson is at 10. I mean, he is the top of tier 3. There are guys I like more than him. A guy like Joe Mixon, who's falling drastically, which I think is a little nuts at this point. And then, guys like we mentioned before, ETN and Aaron Jones. I personally like those 3 names better than Ramondre Stevenson. But why are so many people so high on him this year?
I mean, I think a lot of people want to believe that Belichick and company are going to finally commit to this one running back. And, he showed enough versatility where it's like, okay, this doesn't have to be a thunder and lightning approach like the Green Bay running back room, where Dylan's more of the hammer. Aaron Jones can do a little bit more of everything. Stevenson, I think, reminds people of Aaron Jones in the fact that he's got this versatility to him. But I think there's a lot to be said for things like, okay, they worked out Leonard Fournette. I don't think they're satisfied with this. Damian Harris, he's off in Buffalo now, who is one of my favorite later mid-round picks too. But the Patriots it's a really hard concept for most people to wrap their head around, that they're going to commit to this one guy as the focal point of their offense as a running back, instead of, keeping him spelled with some help. They're not going into the season with Ty Montgomery as their Pierre Strong, those guys as like the number 2s and 3s on the running back depth chart. It's just not going to happen. So it becomes a question of, okay, what caliber player do they bring in behind Stevenson? How much do I want to commit to an offense led by Mac Jones?
Like
All these things start to nibble in your ear, and I'm with you. I would take Mixon over Stevenson pretty comfortably. Like we said, like I was saying, Mixon's horrible efficiency last year, but he had 29 carries inside the 10. Bengals offense is amazing. Just because he only scored, I think it was 6 touchdowns on those 29 carries. The conversion rate wasn't good, but you expect a little regression in that department, and all of a sudden he's back to being that round 2-3 caliber guy. I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, if he's there late in the 3rd round, like, he's gonna be on my team every single time, Joe Mixon. Like, again, we drafted him as a late 1st rounder last year, and that clearly disappointed. But having him as running back 13 doesn't really make sense too much for me. Is he suspended a couple of games? Maybe. I think he might be 2 games.
There's that. I mean, I'll take the discount there. Some people are getting really excited about Chase Brown as a pick, but they let P. Ryan go. I think they're very comfortable at least leaning on Mixon for this last year, and then deciding if they can go with Brown or if they need to draft someone else. But as far as 2023 redraft leagues are concerned, like Mixon is a prime target.
That's what I love to hear. That's why we bring on Nick Mariano, because all the questions that we have, he's going to nip them in the bud. And really what it goes down to is sometimes, and I've been a victim of this, or culprit, whatever, I've sometimes looked, I feel like sometimes you can look too into the numbers, know too much going into a draft. You know, like to over prepare so much that you're thinking more about round 9 and 10 than you are about rounds 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I really do think that, like, I think sometimes less is more when you when you do a draft. Once you have your preparation and, you know, when you're doing waiver wire stuff, you want to really be in the weeds. But like, no one can convince me that Stevenson or Najee Harris is going to be better than Mixon this year. And that's just a personal thing. As far as the top 10 guys go, Christian McCaffrey, this is how Fantasy Pros ranks it. McCaffrey, Eckler, which I'm pretty sure 1, 2. Yeah. Then it has Bijan at 3, which we've already talked about. We're a little bit lower on him. Chubb at 4, Jonathan Taylor at 5, Saquon at 6, Pollard at 7, Henry at 8, Jacobs at 9. Is there a huge discrepancy between any of those guys? Like, so basically what I'm asking, is there anybody you love that I just mentioned there after McCaffrey and Eckler, and anybody you are just not going to take at all?
So out of I mean, I have Jonathan Taylor 3. I'm happy. You know, he showed so much 2 years ago. I'm usually that guy who's, unless someone is 33 years older, you know, really on the other side of their career, if there's a young guy who has shown that they can be the number 1 dominator in fantasy football, and now there's a dip. You know, I did a late underdog draft last night. Jonathan Taylor's just there in the middle of round 2. Like, I'm happily taking that. I'll take him around the bend, but you know, we were talking about like how comfortable you Bijan, say, like as your round 1 pick, and I gave you my reasons for not being entirely comfortable. Like Jonathan Taylor, certainly, I mean, Richardson and everything, there are plenty of question marks, but Jonathan Taylor can just be a snowplow in that offense. And if they are committing to a more run-heavy approach, Taylor's going to be the spearhead of that as Richardson gets comfortable. And I don't care if they run 50 times a game, as long as Taylor's getting 30 of them. I'm not afraid of the Zach Mosses of the world behind him. It's one of these things. It becomes a health proposition, I guess, at that point. But I go into drafts assuming I'm right. And I think that's how everyone has to be. Like, you have to build this plan for your optimized team. I don't want to handcuff. I don't want to hedge. Especially if there's a waiver wire, like I can back it up if I need to, but you have to assume that you have this plan, you're going to execute it. Jonathan Taylor is more than capable of double-digit touchdowns. He's versatile with the passing game. Like, I'm taking him at 3. Chubb is a comfortable 4. Very happy to take him. Jerome Ford is a buzzy sleeper behind him, but this is Chubb's world, and
right
until he gets hurt, he's going to be handling 300, you know, around 300 touches every year. Happy with that. And then, yeah, you get Derrick Henry, one of those guys. Like, I like Tajay Spears as a sleeper behind him. Henry's getting on the other side of that aging curve. DeAndre Hopkins is a big threat in the red zone. I think it helps. I think it becomes kind of this cohesive, symbiotic relationship where Hopkins helps get them down to the red zone more. So even if Henry's percentage of the pie is a little less, the pie should be bigger for everyone.
Yeah.
But in general, you know, as Barkley and Jacobs slide down, I'm happy with Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, Pollard to a degree, a little less so, obviously.
Okay.
But it, as you said, like those guys who can smash it, those guys who have top 5, top 3 potential, you know, Jonathan Taylor, Chubb, Pollard. Bijan does, if you really believe Desmond Ridder can get them there.
Yeah, and you know what? Like really, like I think sometimes like it's almost hard because I just all those guys that I mentioned, really, you could argue one over the other. Like I don't know, I'm kind of high on Tony Pollard. I just I just know the NFC East so well, and the Giants defense was not great last year. Washington's is pretty good. The Eagles are pretty good as well, but listen, like I just know that like Tony Pollard catches swing passes for 17 yards. Like that's just what he does. And you do that 3-4 times in a game, that's already 12, 12 points. And that's what I love about him is just that Cowboys offense is better than the Colts. And I'm not necessarily even saying, I haven't even made up my mind about who I would take over who, but I love Tony Pollard this year. I think he's going to be amazing. The only reason why I wouldn't have him over guys like Derrick Henry yet is because you mentioned Zeke before. We don't really know where Zeke's going, but one of these guys really in the top 10, I think is going to get screwed because of Zeke, because he's going to come in and he's going to get the ball at the 2-yard line, and that's going to be Ezekiel Elliott's future for the next 3 years. So again, it's still we're very early into this, and I'm sure your top 10 rankings are going to change, weekly or maybe even daily as things go down. But no, that was really good on the running backs. I wanted to do this. Usually, and I think I would do this like for the last 4 years, I would show you the rankings of the quarterbacks, and then I would just rip up the rankings, right? Because really, when it comes down to it, if you're drafting in a 12-team league, I'm sure you've done it before. I've done it before. I have gone quarterback lists in drafts sometimes. Like I've done it before, and I'm sure you have too. But there are a couple guys that really, how do we not mention what Patrick Mahomes did last year? Kind of makes him like, ooh, maybe I should be looking at Patrick Mahomes in the 3rd round because, he's a guy who like won me my fantasy draft last year. So, thoughts on just quarterback in general, and just talk to the people, if we're chatting around the fireplace, thoughts on quarterback.
So in your typical 12-team league, I'm most comfortable still waiting at quarterback, but the day has clearly come where late round quarterback as the driving philosophy is no more. It's more of like a fringe camp. But like last year, Daniel Jones was kind of that guy. And I think a lot of people have keyed into the whole, hey, quarterbacks who can run should probably go a little earlier because their upside is higher. And obviously, now we have Justin Fields going probably as the QB6 behind Burrow in most drafts. And I mean, Fields is really getting pushed up, especially now. He's like, oh, I'm going to throw for over 4,000 yards. We got DJ Moore, a lot of faith there. But people are comfortable taking that leap because they see Jalen Hurts, that leap. Everyone is looking for like this year's Jalen Hurts. They want that one mold to just carry over year after year. And we've seen that, rookie wide receivers after Odell Beckham pop, like everyone hangs on to this archetype. And, it's fair. It's an anchoring bias. All of our brains have it. It's how we're wired. We spent millions of years roaming the jungle and having our brains wired for that. And now all of a sudden we're playing fantasy football. In general, I try to wait. There's usually one point in the draft for a 12-teamer where someone slides almost a round down just because the guy, you take any pool of 12 people, maybe 3 or 4 are really aggressive at quarterback. And then you hit that pocket where all of a sudden people aren't. And Justin Herbert, all of a sudden he's going a little late. Maybe you already drafted Keenan Allen or even Eckler that you want to stack with. Those kind of things, I'll let it fall to me, but I'm never looking for it. I'm more than happy. I wouldn't say more than happy to get Deshaun Watson, but Trevor Lawrence, I think, has been the guy I've probably taken the most as far as hitting that comfort point with, I have a wide receiver base. I have at least one hero running back to be the champion. If I missed on the Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce's of the world, I'm probably not taking a tight end in that range unless someone like Dallas Goedert falls a lot. So it usually winds up being Trevor Lawrence right around that 7th or so, 8th. He's fallen to the 8th a couple times. I expect that to change. And then, yeah, like you said, if it comes down to it, I'm fine loading up the roster with running backs and wide receivers, going without a kicker, without a defense, without a quarterback until week 1 rolls around and I need to fill it out. Like, that's fine. Find the upside where you can, take the flyers, and then all of a sudden, whatever. Add a Russell Wilson, Jared Goff goes in the last round. You always get those people who draft 2 or 3 quarterbacks, but
yeah,
you deal with
exactly.
it.
Okay, and as far as Patrick Mahomes, he's there in the mid-3rd round. You already have a running back and a wide receiver. You taking him?
If I'm on like the elbow and say it's like late round 3 somehow, then I'd probably be comfortable doing that. If it's early round 3 and like I just took, someone like T. Higgins or something, or Devonta Smith, and it's not going to be my pick again for another 20 picks or something, then no, I've got to take another playmaker, because it gets uncomfortable so quickly. It really does.
Yeah. No, absolutely. We had to talk about it is the most important position in sports. So we had to talk about it for a minute. All right. We got two last questions, and this ran a little long, but I'm happy to do it. I'm grateful that you came on and gave us your time today. Obviously, the tight end position we will talk about for a second. Travis Kelce, like you mentioned before, he can go anywhere. Let's say 7 overall. Is that a fair assessment? Top
He's
7?
usually going 6.
Yeah. Okay. So top 6.
Him and Eckler jostle.
Gotcha. So Kelsey's the man. He's an outlier when it comes to the tight end position. Then you have Mark Andrews, who's a little bit higher than the Hawkinson, Kittle, Pitts, Goddard range. Yeah. I'm really high on TJ Hawkinson this year, especially high on him. Maybe it's because of the last game that I saw him play against the Giants, where he had like 11 receptions, or the game that they played against the Giants before that, and he had 10 receptions, because he really is the Jalen Waddle in the Vikings offense, or, he is that T. Higgins type of guy where Kirk Cousins loves himself a security blanket. I'm really high on Hawkinson. But when it comes to Hawkinson and Kittle, who do you like more? Because this was an argument I was having a couple days ago as well.
Personally, it's hard for me to justify Kittle with the low floor in that passing off. Again, you try to reasonably assume health for everyone, unless you have a very good reason not to. And when you've got Debo, everyone loves Brandon Ayuk. You've got a healthy CMC motoring back there. It's really hard for me to click draft on Kittle. Personally, I don't love this tier much at all. Like, I think Mark Andrews is going way too low, with Todd Monken now all of a sudden back in the NFL as offensive coordinator, and their projected pass rate is probably going up to like 55% versus barely cracking 50. So if I don't get Andrews, and obviously didn't get Kelce in the first round, Hawkinson, I think he's definitely the best. Once you get through Kelce and Andrews, Hawkinson is absolutely the next best guy.
Okay.
And I think that works against him with the market forces, because people get to that point in the draft and they're not enamored. Like we said, tier 3 wide receiver, tier 4 wide receiver, and all that. It starts to get a little not very glamorous. So then they start to see, oh, Hawkinson, well, I can get a stud tight end, and he starts to creep up. In general, there's that whole you have this tier, this tier, this tier, and like there's you usually, I try to avoid taking the first guy in a tier because it's probably getting bumped up as people see the best of the best remaining. And then there's the last guy in a tier where there's like a clear drop off after, people start to get really aggressive there, especially with auction drafts. Like
Yeah.
that you can expect the price, everyone's waiting for that guy to go. Try to find that middle point, but yeah, it's really hard, especially the snake drafts. You have the draft position that you have, but in general, I'm not thrilled with, if I get Hawkinson, I get Hawkinson. I'm not going to be upset, but the market price I've not found to be the best. I would rather wait and see if Goddard goes, or
Yeah.
probably Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram's my most drafted tight end so far of the, guys who aren't complete late round flyers, but him and
Yeah.
Irv Smith in Cincinnati.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, there's always what? There's always 4 or 5 guys that you're quote unquote excited about this year. I mean, again, Dallas Goedert could be higher than Mark Andrews. He could be, I mean, again, I'm not a guy, I will never draft Kyle Pitts. I've seen what he's done to teams. I don't know why he continues to be a top 5 guy every single year on the list. Obviously, he's an athlete. Obviously, he's electric. But when you have Desmond Ridder throwing him the ball in a bad offense, it doesn't make sense. Like maybe it's just getting all this information from you. I'm a little bit upset because I know that TJ Hawkinson probably won't be on my team as much as I would like, but I agree with you. Evan Ingram ranked here 8th. I would probably draft Evan Ingram over every single guy other than Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson, Kittle, and Goddard. So I probably have him at 6. Darren Waller, again, he's kind of like Kyle Pitts. But are you really going to... Daniel Jones throws it to 7 guys. He's running this way. He's running that way. So, yeah, I don't know. The tight end position is kind of tough this year. And then final question, and again, you've been great. This was so much fun. As far as auction drafts go, is there a strategy that you like to wait more, or is it just really an inexact science, or just one tip that you would give to the people out there that are drafting auction drafts early?
So every single auction draft is essentially, you can picture like a small country unto itself, like, little Monaco or something. Every single individual draft is its own market, its own little microeconomical experiment. Go in with a plan. You have your budget. Like, I expect you can take the average consensus kind of budget and get something spit out from Fantasy Pros, obviously from Rotoballer. And then you'll know within the first 2 or 3 picks whether your room is more aggressive or under aggressive, and you pretty much need to be ready to pounce. If they come in underweight on those first round picks, those big names that come in, you should strike.
You're right.
You should take the value where you can. If they're being outrageous with the top names, I do think you have to, kind of suck it up and get someone who is a first round caliber player, but there will be people who will be chomping at the bit to go stars and scrubs, and they're going to wind up overpricing themselves by $10, $15 because they told themselves ahead of time, they had a concrete plan. I'm going to get 3 of the top 15 guys, and they wind up hurting their budget. And, you have to definitely be flexible. You have to have probably about, I would say, 5 to 10 different roadmaps, if you could, as like a flow chart of like, okay, I'm going to spend $40 on like my wide receiver 1, and then be ready to rip that up and throw it out if it doesn't go so hot.
Yeah.
You have to be ready to read the market when it comes. It'll come quick. But I will say that auction drafts absolutely annihilate snake drafts as far as entertainment, as far as being fair. Snake drafts is kind of the caveman way. I understand they wanted to replicate real life, or people just don't want to think that hard every single pick. Like, they don't, they want to go go shotgun a beer or something between picks.
Right.
That's fine. But there's this, there used to be a chart I could find. I've asked Andy Behrens at Yahoo for it. I haven't gotten it the past couple of years, but if you have a top 3-4 pick in a snake draft, you have a way higher chance of winning the league. Like champions are inordinately skewed towards that front end. And unless you have some meritocracy for why these people have this pick, there's like, why? Because you picked that name out of the hat, all of a sudden this guy has a 10% greater chance to win the league? No.
Yeah.
Make it an auction, get your life together, pay attention, have the draft, have everyone have a chance, and have the champion actually be the champion, not just the guy who happened to get the first overall pick.
Yeah. The guy who got Saquon Barkley, the guy who got Christian McCaffrey or Justin Jefferson, and then on the wraparound got T. Higgins and, these top guys. No, I completely agree with you. The auction is the best way to do it. And again, with your advice is just come in and be ready to audible like Peyton Manning. The person who adapts the quickest to a fantasy draft. And also, I will say this, because I did one last year, and my game plan was don't spend on tight end, don't spend on quarterback, right? That was my plan. It was like, I'm just that's going to be my plan. I'm going to spend this much on this. The guys came out, and one team had Derrick Henry and Justin Jefferson and this guy, and all these guys were flying off the board. I waited and waited and waited. I ended up getting Patrick Mahomes and Mark Andrews, who are two guys that were, I didn't want a quarterback. I didn't want to spend on tight end. So again, the only game plan that you have is that you have to adapt. But again, as auctions or salary caps, as now they're called, as they continue to get to the forefront, because I agree with you, snake drafts are terrible. We just changed it in my main league, and salary cap leagues are the way to go. So yeah, just be ready to adapt and do some homework. That's really what the matter of fact is. It's really easy to click a button when a computer's telling you, oh, take this guy, but salary cap auction leagues are the way of the future and the present. Nick Mariano, it's been a pleasure. And now, you basically are the fantasy expert of the Jimmy Randazzo show, which basically means you have to come on whenever I ask you to, but I'm sure you'd be happy to do that. Rotoballer, he is the king over there, over at Twitter, Nick Mariano, and I'll be blasting away on Twitter, and we'll get those followers up. We're gonna get you, we're gonna get you a few hundred extra people. Hopefully, the Jimmy Randazzo show people, follow along. I'm excited for fantasy football. I'm ready to get into it. Nick, thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely, this was big fun. Happy to keep going through this as news breaks, training camp comes. We get the hype videos. Everyone's in the best shape of their life. We'll do some drafts. We're gonna have some fun.